Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about one of the most divisive topics of our time, the topic of free will. Do we have it? And what are all the arguments for it? Before we start, I just want to clarify that many of the topics we are going to discuss might make some of you uncomfortable, because they do scratch the surface of a person's being. So just a heads up if you are someone that's not comfortable of thinking of your mind in this manner. I remember when I first encountered the idea of determinism, and to a further extent, fatalism. I had many sleepless nights trying to come to grips with reality, and if I can be honest, it did bother me for some time. Many of the arguments I have derived are from the most popular videos, top books, and most prolific advocates of free will, namely Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Dan Dennett, Robert Sapolsky, and many others that I have since forgotten. So if by any miracle I spout out a Nobel Prize-winning argument, please do not contribute it to me. Before we go any further, I feel it necessary to distinguish between two topics that get quite confusing when talking about free will. It is the topic of determinism and fatalism. Determinism is the idea that every event, including human actions, is caused by previous events and conditions, and therefore predetermined. This implies that we don't have free will, because our choices are also predetermined by past events. Fatalism is the belief that all events are predetermined and unchangeable by human actions. It's essentially the acceptance of fate. I've been wondering where to start with the introduction of this argument. One of the first books I read on evolutionary biology came to mind, The Whisperings Within by David Barsh. The section I'm thinking of is how genes can influence our behavior. For instance, it's no secret that dogs are bred to fight, to have a more aggressive temperament. Now, I'm not looking to get into an argument of nature versus nurture, but on a personal note, we know that a lot of personality traits that you have are hereditary, meaning that you inherit them from your parents. I remember one study where they found that an adopted child exhibited nearly all the traits of their biological parents and very few, if any, from their newly adopted parent. In any case, in the book there was an example where mice were bred in according to their behavior, a type of eugenics, if you will. They had a maze where they placed the mice in. For the mice to complete the maze, when they came to the first crossroads, they had to turn left. If they turned left and finished the maze, they were chosen to reproduce. Over time, they ended up with mice that had an instinctual urge to turn left. What it was, I cannot say, and I'm sure they cannot either. But it does seem quite odd that mice can be bred to be predetermined in their choices. So why do we think we are any different? I always thought of determinism in this way. Imagine you have a supercomputer, one that has an almost infinite amount of computing power. Now, you input all the variables of the universe into it, all your ancestors' genes, every variable of the environment, and then you ask yourself, would it be able to predict every action that you would make? Remember, this computer has mapped out the exact hormonal levels, the exact amount of neurons in your brain. Would you still consider yourself to be free if we look at it this way? But I think this example is a bit fatalistic, but it did cause some existential angst in my life. If I were to put you in a controlled environment and observed you making choices, let's say picking between a red button and a blue button, I would hook up some brain sensors and then I would be able to accurately predict which button you would choose every time before you chose them. Now, even if you were one of the most fearsome defenders of free will, this is quite unsettling. This is exactly what the psychologist Benjamin Libet did, using EEG to show that the activity in the brain's motor cortex can be detected some 300 milliseconds before a person feels that he has made a decision. Another lab extended this work using functional magnetic resonance imagery, fMRI. Subjects were asked to press one of two buttons while watching a clock, composed of random sequence of letters appearing on screen. They reported which letter was visible at the moment they decided to press one button or the other. The experiments found two brain regions that contained information about which button subjects would press a full 7 to 10 seconds before the decision was consciously made. These brain observations are quite unsettling. Why does the brain feel the need to convince itself of the free will of a choice when it has already made it? More recently, direct recordings from the cortex showed that the activity of merely 256 neurons was sufficient to predict with 80% accuracy a person's decision to move 700 milliseconds before he became aware of it. The whole thing boils down to choice, obviously. Think of your heart or your liver. No amount of free thinking can make your heart stop beating by thoughts alone. You don't help your body create new white blood cells, but all these functions are still controlled by the brain, but by parts that you don't have access to. So even by free will standards, you are not completely free. If I snap my fingers and tell you not to hear them, you would obviously not be able to do so. So are you completely in control? Let us play a thought experiment. I'll use one that Sam Harris uses because I find it the most useful and the easiest to grasp. Okay, now let us imagine a movie. Any movie that your heart desires. We can eliminate all the movies that you don't know, for it would be impossible for you to choose them. Okay, do you have one? Okay, now let's do this again, but choose a different movie this time. And take as much time as you need. And try to pay attention to the process of choice and thought. You know a lot of movies, but only a handful of options arose when I said, pick a movie. You'll see that when I say pick a movie, it is as if the options arise out of this fog, these murky waters, and these are the only options you have. Now, people will always give justification and reason for why they chose what they chose, which doesn't bear as much weight as you would think. Seeing that the parameters for, what you choose was arbitrary or random, you would say, well, Fast and Furious, because I saw a Lamborghini today. Why did you go with that option? Why not say, well, I'm feeling eccentric today and went with a classic, like Titanic? The justifications of the options are totally arbitrary. Experiments in controlled environments will tell participants to hit a secret combination of buttons for a reward, when the reward is totally randomly awarded to the participants. When asked what the secret combination of buttons is, the participants will always have a belief that what they were doing had an influence on the reward, when in actuality it had nothing to do with it. Now the question still sits. Why would the brain choose to justify answers that are totally random in nature? I think it might be because we as humans are pattern-seeking creatures, but it doesn't explain the randomness of the ideas. If you were bored from the last few sentences and you were daydreaming, it wasn't because you wanted to, it simply just happened. If I were to have a great business idea, a eureka moment today, out of the blue, did you as a conscious self create it? And if you did, why now? Why not yesterday if you can create brilliant ideas on command? As I am talking now, I'm not thinking of what I'm going to say next. It simply just appears in my mind. I can go off the rails. I can start ranting about books and elephants and gypsy girls. It was random. The longer I think of determinism and conscious decision making, the more it feels like I'm only an observer. I can only see how reality is unfolding in front of me. I'm in the back seat of a car, which someone else is driving. I'm convinced that I'm the one holding onto the steering wheel for some reason. Another important role player in the discussion of free will is if we have a self, and if we do, where is it? Many advocates of free will see the self as a myth. There is no self, which I presume they are referring to consciousness to some extent, but I might be wrong on this. I've been reading Bertrand Russell's Problem of Philosophy, and he had this interesting quote on this. When we try to look into ourselves, we always seem to come up with some particular thought or feeling, and not upon the I, which has the thought or feeling. We know we have a subconscious and a conscious, but where the self lies is a mystery. When we dream, the dream always seems to follow a normal storyline of exposition, climax, and ending. And many say dreams can be interpreted and have meaning to them. Carl Jung is one of the most famous psychologists who believe in the practice of dream interpretation. Now, how is it that your body knows something on one level and not on another? How can a dream have meaning, but you have to search and interpret to find the meaning? For instance, Freud and Jung had these episodes where they had fainting fits. Ernest Becker's book Denial of Death goes deeper into this. But in any case, the body causes one to faint if the realization of the information is too damaging or too much to process. For example, people faint when they see dead bodies for the first time, because the realization of death is now manifested into a reality and isn't this abstract thought anymore. Thus, the realization that one is going to die one day is too much for the brain, and then subsequently faints. Now, how does the brain know this? How can we know things and at the same time don't? The brain knows that it doesn't have a grasp on death. Still, it will convince itself that it knows all there is to know. A type of illusion, if you will. As if you are not in control of your entire brain. For you would never faint if you could help it. But there seems to be a true representation of reality in one part of the brain, and another that uses filters to perceive and distort reality. There is a sort of duality in the brain, and where the self lies in it is a total mystery. Take for instance, there's this one case where the girl had to take out the left hemisphere of her brain when she was young. She recovered fully, and with the brain being young and still retaining its plasticity, she functioned like a normal human, doing maths and socializing. She subsequently was her normal, conscious self. Now let us say, theoretically, we take a normal person at birth and then split the brain into two hemispheres. We put the one half in one body and the other half in another body. As the two independent people develop and both become conscious independently of each other, who is the real person then? This is the problem with the self, or rather, we don't know where it is. Let us imagine one neuron is an ant. Very rudimentary and simple to grasp, but for some reason, when you have a bunch of them, you form this complex hive that moves as an entity. And now we have to expect consciousness to arise out of this. It's as if we are missing a step. If you paint a mental image of a yellow triangle in your mind's eye, yes, I can represent it as neurons firing and hormone levels and all the other brain doodads you need. Keep in mind, I'm not a neurobiologist, but I can physically see and experience the image of the yellow triangle. These experiences are too complex for science to comprehend. Dan Dennett wrote this book, Consciousness Explained, and many of his critics said the book should rather be called Consciousness Explained Away. Because for some reason, when we try to dissect consciousness, we lose it completely, which is just baffling to me. When I fix an engine and replace the spark plug, I'm not expecting to lose the whole damn engine in the process. I think our understanding of the brain, and to an extension consciousness, is in its early stages, such as alchemy was, and then over time it morphed into chemistry. Let us further elaborate on the brain structure and its use in free will. This is yet again a similar example to one that Sam Harris used. We have someone that is a murderer. Subsequently, the feeling of rage and revenge engulfs us. Then we find out that he had a brain tumor in the place of his brain for empathy and the desire to kill. Now, all of a sudden, the rage somewhat subsides because now he is a victim of biology. What if we move the brain tumor to his ability to act upon his actions? Then can he be guilty? Now, as his brain structure is compromised to let him act in his own unique way, we can also say that the unique brain structure we have regarding the area of free will is also compromised and impacts the way we freely choose. Some people are creative because their brain structure is inclined in the same way that some people are lazy. Let's say a woman is driving and has a seizure and kills someone in a car crash. No one is at fault except the faulty brain structure. Now, what about the same for evil? Someone with a faulty brain structure. If the murderer can thereby take medication for evil, like the woman takes medication for her seizures, would we feel less enraged? Because him being evil is only a result of him being a victim of biology. And if you say my example is a bit far-fetched, well, in the medieval times, people that had seizures were suspected of dealing with the devil, which in their eyes were a lot more evil than a murderer. People say they have free will, but as soon as something unpleasant arises, they blame the environment or past events. Don't tease me. You know I have anger management problems, inherited from dad. Or, you know I'm not good at remembering things. I just tend to forget. This is basically the definition of determinism. In fear of repeating myself, the whole thing comes down to choice. But what did you choose? You didn't choose your parents, genetics, environment, and the list goes on. But most importantly, you didn't choose your soul, or what we would call the self. The murderer didn't choose to be born with a murderous soul, and you definitely didn't choose to be your depressive self. How do I know? Well, you are watching a video of free will. Come on. I have a day job, and a lot of the people I come in contact with on a daily basis are very poor and subsequently just defeated by life. I do fully believe that if I were to trade places with them, brain cell for brain cell, and environment for environment, I would turn out just like them. If you are a die-hard Newtonian, you almost have to believe it, because they believe everything is in accordance with the laws of motion. If we rewind the universe back to its beginning and imply the laws of motion, every atom would land exactly where it is today, and would consequently be predetermined. But some clarity is needed since the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that states that an electron can be at any one place at a time or everywhere at once, proving that randomness is possible in the universe. But randomness is not free will. If you make choices randomly, you still are not free and are still predetermined by past events. And this is where the existential threat lies. What did we choose then? It is this type of regression problem where what keeps up the earth? And you say, well, it's on a turtle's back. And then you ask, okay, but what's underneath the turtle? And you say, no, it's turtles all the way down. Because subsequently, did we choose anything? So if I were to argue for free will, what would my argument be? Well, me and my brilliant brain came up with this argument. Well, we do not act as if free will is false. We act as if it's true. I thought this was a groundbreaking at the time, but I've since found out every defender of free will uses this argument, so... But to be fair, we do act in accordance with free will. The one time, me and a friend were discussing free will, and he took the stance against it, and I took the stance for free will. As he was ranting over the non-existence of free will, I wanted to punch him in the nose mid-sentence to see what he would do, seeing that he is a stark denier of free will. But sadly, I didn't do so, but I thought it would be funny. And this is where I don't agree with Sam Harris when he says that the illusion of free will is an illusion. I'll use this example of a visual illusion. Some illusions, like this one, when you first see it, you can't unsee it. Others, like this one, the cube, by focusing, you can change the perspective of the illusion. Now, free will I see as the latter, where we think of it now as an illusion, but as soon as you end this video and go about your daily life, you will act in accordance with free will. And this might not be true for everyone, but you can be sure that the majority of people will. Because to act as if you don't have free will is subsequently just too much to bear. Now back again to the topic of acting as if you have free will. Well, I do believe that the reality we live in to some extent is subjective, especially with our ideological lens we look through to interpret the symbolic nature of reality. So, is the illusion of free will actually false if we live with the notion that it is true? And if we act as if we have free will, how would someone act that doesn't have free will? This question was posed by Alex O'Connor. Well, this is obviously a difficult question to answer, but by sheer chance, the answer randomly appeared in my conscious mind. Well, firstly, do we perceive animals as conscious beings or beings that possess free will? Well, I've always loved dogs, so I thought it best to get the answer from the source. This is Farley. Farley, do you have free will? I do see dogs as animals just like any other, but they do seem to imitate consciousness very well in their behavior. But I'm not too sure they are conscious in the way we define consciousness. But on the subject at hand, do animals have free will? Well, if a bear attacks you, people won't blame the bear because it is in its nature to do so. It does what the bear does. So, can we extend this by saying people have the illusion of making choices? That's just what people do. The other solution I have towards this question is if you want to feel how it feels to operate without free will, or rather the illusion of free will, think of dreaming, and not lucid dreaming. We'll come to that in a second. When we dream, it feels as if you are just along for the ride. We are not in control of our actions, even if this means jumping off a building. The story seems to unfold in front of us like a movie, where we have no control over the characters. Now, in lucid dreaming, we seem to retain the consciousness of our daily lives, but we don't control everything in the dream, simply the conscious choices as you normally would. The setting and other events seem to be determined by your mind. This is yet again the question of how do we know something on one level of the brain and not on another. So this is basically the best I could come up with for the question of how someone would look acting without free will. If I were to look at free will through the lens of evolution, we are inclined to ask, why then does it feel like we have free will, if it might not be true? Well, I think the answer in terms of evolution is this. We always seem to put the most accurate representation of reality as the highest truth, facts over feelings. But evolution doesn't work this way. Evolution operates in the domain of usefulness. It doesn't put facts as the dominant operating system. It will rather put the most useful adaptation in its place. So why is free will useful to us? Well, people tend to act differently when we perceive each other as autonomous beings. I read this one study where people were less inclined to cheat on tests if they believed that they had free will. The thing is, free will gives us a sense of responsibility. That's why people don't like the argument, because it undermines the foundation of human civilization, most notably religion and responsibility. And let's take revenge, for example. Why take revenge if you believe that the wrongdoing against you is of no fault of your own? Well, the brain induces a sense of rage to eliminate the threat for future attacks. This is regardless if the person is at fault, as long as you have been placed in a better, more useful position by eliminating the potential future threat. When I was younger, I always did public speaking and debates. And at the time, you weren't really passionate about the topics because, firstly, they were very boring, such as recycling. And mostly because you were judged on your presentation and not really the content. One of the things that they taught us is always to argue against the topic. This makes for a better speech. Now, I fully went into this conversation trying to argue against it, but I have struggled to find any opposing arguments. I do see myself as someone that believes in free will, mostly because I can't seem to live with myself if I don't. These are the arguments against free will. Well, firstly, I have my own reason, and that is, what is the true representation of reality? Is it the facts of reality, or whether the usefulness of our ideologies is the true representation? I go on about this ideology thing like Jordan Peterson goes on about meaning, or Christopher Hitchens about atheism. But in any case, The next alternative is compatibilism. To be honest, I'm not too fond of the solution of compatibilism. Let us remember, determinism suggests that everything in the universe, including human actions and choices, is determined by prior causes. Compatibilism tries to find the middle ground between determinism and free will. It says that even if determinism is true, it's still possible for us to have free will in a meaningful way. How? Well, it argues that free will isn't about being completely free from causes or influence. Instead, it's about being able to act according to our own desires and motivations without external factors. So even if our actions are determined by past events or factors, as long as we are not forced to act against our will, we can still be considered free. Compatibilism is a lot like playing a video game, where the storyline of the game is set, but you are still a playable character inside the game. But it always seems as if compatibilism can be proven wrong by a lot of the deterministic arguments, but maybe it's just because I don't know a lot about it. Another solution is by Jordan Peterson. His view on free will revolves around the idea that the future is unpredictable and the universe is not deterministic. He argues that humans are not like clockwork machines and our actions aren't entirely predetermined. While our will may be bound to some extent, we're not entirely deterministic beings. In simpler terms, Jordan Peterson uses this example of a ballistic movement, like throwing a ball. Once you throw it, you can't change its path. This shows a deterministic action because you set it up but can't control it once it is in motion. However, he argues that while some actions may seem deterministic, our future actions are less determined the farther out we look. This suggests that while we may not have complete free will, our choices aren't entirely predetermined either. I can understand why people don't like to undermine the idea of free will. You are poking at the world's judicial system. You are taking away willpower and meaning. People say when we lose free will, you can do just whatever you want. It is here again where we must remember not to confuse determinism and fatalism. Even if you are predetermined, you can't just run around murdering people. Although you say it's not your fault, insert the faulty brain chemistry, brain structure, you will still go to prison because society as a whole will be better off without you. On the issue of determinism and punishment of people is normally where the divide comes in between should people actually be punished if they are not completely in control of their actions? Think of the murderer with the brain tumor. I remember watching the documentary on HBO, it's crazy, not insane, where the show tries to build a case against the death penalty. Now, the video is already long enough, so I'm not going to discuss all the aspects of the death penalty and should we have it or not. But just to let us think, is it fair to kill someone if they had no control, if we were to look at them through this deterministic lens? And then, the question would be, is it better for society as a whole to indulge in its revengeful tendencies? The whole of determinism can basically be summed up in the following sentences. You can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do. Or rather, I do not choose to choose what I choose. I do not know what further to say on the subject of free will. Like I said, I feel like the concept is still in its infant stages. But for now, I think I'll keep acting as if I have free will or not. It's not really my decision.